Today we'll be working in my workbook called Joseph from Commander to Son. And this finishes off the book of Genesis. It covers Genesis 42 through 50. And if we look at the table of contents, we've already completed the first four chapters. And basically, in the first four chapters, this book starts when the 10 brothers go traveling to Egypt to get food because of famine is on. And at that point, Joseph sees his brothers and he starts a series of trials for them. We think that Joseph isn't the sole reason why these trials exist. We think that God may be guiding Joseph as to what to do for several reasons. But anyway, so in the first time that the brothers are there, uh, they do get food, grain for their family, but they return to Canaan without Simeon. Simeon stays in prison, and with the knowledge that they have to bring Benjamin back with them if they're going to get any more grain. They also are surprised to find out that all their silver has been replaced in their sacks. So in chapter 3, then, the famine is still continuing. Jacob has no choice but to send Benjamin back with them. So they head back with the silver that they had received, also to attempt to explain that and for more grain. So then they see Joseph. Joseph then has them eat at his house, although he still doesn't tell them who he is. Benjamin gets the greater portion of all the food. They are seated in order of age, which is a big surprise because many of them are only months difference in age. And but Joseph still doesn't tell them who he is. When they leave, again with the grain they need, the provisions for the journey, and their silver back in their sacks, but they also have the silver cup that Joseph has told his steward to put in Benjamin's sack. And so before they even reach a day's journey away, the steward comes after them, discovers the cup in Benjamin's sack, and they all go back because this would mean that Benjamin would become the slave to Joseph, who they don't realize is his brother. So they all go back again. And Joseph initially puts on this display of fighting, saying, you stole my diviner's cup. Is that what you should do? And then Judah fights for Benjamin, stating that if we do not bring Benjamin back, Jacob will surely die. And we're left with, what is Joseph going to do? So now in chapter 5, we're going to find out what he's going to do. Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. Genesis 45, verses 1 through 28. Genesis 45:1. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence!" So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and the Pharaoh's household heard about it. So, one, there were several times since he first saw his brothers that Joseph had to move to another room to cry, but now he could no longer play the charade. What did Judah say that was finally convincing enough for Joseph to tell his brothers who he is? I believe it was when Judah made the point that Jacob probably would not survive not having Benjamin because he already was suffering from losing Joseph. I believe that was the convincing mark that made Joseph finally decide it was time to tell his brothers who he really was. Again, commentators believe these trials are not because of Joseph wanted to seek revenge, but God asked him to do these things to test his brothers. Even though the words say, "Have everyone leave my presence," technically he meant only the Egyptian attendants. What is Joseph going to do? He's going to reveal himself to his brothers. Joseph was so overcome with emotion that who heard about it? The Pharaoh's household heard about it. Genesis 45:3. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence, I would think. Then Joseph said to his brothers, Come close to me. When they have done so, that he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. So here we have, first, they're not sure. His brothers aren't even sure what to think about all this. But they also don't necessarily recognize him. So they had Joseph ask them to come closer. And of course, he's touching them at this time, which is, of course, something that an Egyptian wouldn't do. And they may start to recognize him behind the makeup, behind the clothes, behind everything, that is the Joseph they remember. Instead of the language of the Egyptians, what language did Joseph probably speak in verse 3? Hebrew. There were many reasons why the brothers would be terrified to know that this man was their brother Joseph. What could be some of them? A, the 10 brothers had sold him to the Mennonite traders over 20 years ago. Yes, that's probably in their mind. The 10 brothers had assumed that Joseph was no longer living but dead. Yes, that I'm sure was in their mind. This man had treated them so strangely, accusing them in the beginning of being spies. Yeah, I mean, all the trials that he put them through probably was difficult. All this time they had told Jacob that Joseph had been killed. Yeah, what are they going to say now that Joseph is alive? And they never once went to look for him in the country of Egypt. Yes, they never went to check to see where he is. And so they have all these things in their mind as far as something they have to worry about. What did Joseph say after his brothers were terrified from his first statement? Come closer to me. He was 20 years older, in different clothes and makeup, and he wanted them to come close to look at him. Genesis 45:5. And now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you, preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Joseph tells his brothers not to be angry or upset because God is the one that sent him to Egypt. How long has the famine been in the land? 2 years. This confirms that they traveled to Egypt during the first 2 years of the famine. How many years are left of the famine? 5 more years. Number 4, God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. This is the whole theme of the story of Joseph, and also why Joseph is considered a type or foreshadow of Christ. And speaking of type or foreshadow of Christ, here are some ways that Joseph is a type or foreshadow of Christ. Both were firstborn children, even though it's from Rachel and not the firstborn son of Jacob, but firstborn of Rachel. And both are most loved of their fathers. Okay. Both Joseph and Jesus' brothers were jealous of them and did not believe them. That is true. The prophecy stated that Joseph would rule his brothers, the tribes of Israel, and Jesus would rule the whole world, including Israel. Joseph was sent by his father to his brothers. Jesus was sent by his father to Israel. Both were sold by one of the 12 named Judah, Greek name Judas. Both were apparently put to death but rose again. Joseph was sold as a slave to Egypt. Jesus was betrayed for a price of a slave. Both went to Egypt. Both were with 2 other condemned to die, one of which was pardoned and given life, the cupbearer and the baker and the 2 thieves on the cross. The king of Egypt exalted Joseph to be ruler over all, to bring all under the king's rule. Jesus is exalted to bring all under God's rule. All knees bowed to Joseph, all knees will bow to Jesus. Both were given a Gentile bride by the king. Joseph was about 30 years old when he started working for Pharaoh. Jesus was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. Joseph's brothers did not recognize him. Jesus' only people did not recognize him as the Messiah either. Joseph's brothers shared Pharaoh's favor because of Joseph, not of themselves. We share God's favor because of Jesus, not because we are worthy. And lastly, Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, come through his Gentile wife and are given full tribe status. Gentiles who believe are considered full members of God's people. So those are just some of the ideas. There are others, but these were the ones that I picked out as being what I liked. Anyway, back to the story. Genesis 45:8. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. You, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. What were the 4 actions that Joseph attributes to God? God had sent Joseph there. He made him father of Pharaoh. He made him lord of his entire household and ruler of Egypt. Joseph tells his brother to tell Jacob several actions to take. They are, come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. Bring your flocks and herds and all that you have. What will happen to Jacob's family if they don't come to Egypt? They'll become destitute or actually die out because there'll be a famine. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt, about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, also weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterwards, his brothers talked with him. You can see for yourselves that it is really I who am speaking to you. This makes more sense when we realize that he is speaking Hebrew instead of Egyptian, and he brings them close and touches them, something a normal Egyptian would not have done. What are the brothers to tell Jacob about? The honor accorded to him and everything that he has seen. How did Joseph show his affection to his brothers? He hugged them all and kissed them. What do you think Joseph and his brothers talked about? All basically catching up on what has happened, mostly to Joseph. I would think. The scriptures continue. Genesis 45:16. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers, do this, load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me. I'll give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land. You are also directed to tell them, do this, take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours. Genesis 45:2 gives us the first time that Pharaoh's household knew something strange was going on. What did they hear? Well, if you remember back, that was when Joseph first revealed himself to his brothers, and he cried so loudly that the Pharaoh's household had heard it. So they knew that he was in distress. What did Pharaoh's household now learn was the cause of Joseph's weeping, that his brothers had come. Pharaoh tells Joseph in Egyptian to tell his brothers the following: load your animals and return to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt. Take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours. Genesis 45:21. So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving, he said to them, "Don't quarrel on the way." Not only carts, but Joseph's brothers also got what for their journey? Provisions for their journey. Joseph also gave the brothers a gift. What was it? Clothing. To Benjamin, along with clothing, he gave him 300 shekels of silver. What did Joseph send to his father? 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt. These were probably the original donkeys. And then 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions. And then 5, don't quarrel on the way. Probably they would be talking to each other about how to tell Jacob that Joseph is alive and what they knew about Joseph's death over 20 years up. And but we've got another error here. But they knew about Joseph's supposed death over 20 years. So gotta fix that. I have an editor, but it's my husband, and I'm beginning to learn exactly what he looks for and fixes those. I fix those, and so there you go. Genesis 45:25. So they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him, "Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt." Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when he told them everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father revived. Jacob revived. And Israel said, "I am convinced. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." How long would it have taken them to get back to Jacob and the rest of the family? I believe I originally said about 30 days. This is what I get for not having the answers in front of me. Let's see. I believe it's 20 and 30 days by donkey. Yeah, 20 to 30 days to travel home by donkey. Was Benjamin and Simeon with them? Yes, so that would make them 11 animals going. So I guess one of them is leading the female donkey. I don't know. During the trip home, they might have discussed how they were going to tell Jacob that Joseph was alive and how that could be. What did they decide to tell Jacob? Circle 1. Did they say, "We don't know how Joseph survived, especially since we showed you his bloodied coat, but he's alive"? No, they didn't use that phrase. B, "Father, we're sorry we sold him into slavery, but look at all that happened." Well, they definitely didn't say that. But "Father, Joseph is alive and he's the ruler of all Egypt and he sent you many things." That's what they use. They decide to go with that statement. Notice the name change in verse 28. Based on the theory on page 29, why is Jacob's name of Israel used here? Again, we're starting to see is Israel is normally used when he's looking at the future. So we come to the end of the chapter here. And so let's see, 2 across, Jacob's other name was Israel. 4 across, Joseph is considered a type or foreshadow of Christ. 8, Joseph told his brothers as they left, "Don't quarrel along the way or on the way." Number 9, where would the Israelites live in Egypt? Goshen. Number 10, Pharaoh provided carts. I believe that's what he's going to say. Carts, yes, provided carts for the children and wives of Joseph's extended family. 11, Joseph gave each of his brothers new clothing. The one down, who heard what was happening in Joseph's house? Pharaoh. Who is the youngest of all the 12 brothers? That would be Benjamin. In verse 45:1, Joseph really did not mean everyone, but just all his Attendance. The famine has already been in the land for 2 years. And 7, who is the father of the 12 brothers? Jacob. So that's the end of this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.